Hi everyone, welcome to the second Torah study of the fall semester. I wanted to speak about losing. Not that that's a popular topic, not that I hope everyone ever loses, but there were elections recently, and in every election there's always someone who loses, by definition. And the foundation of democracy is the concept that there's going to be a vote, and there's going to be a side that wins and a side that loses, not to use that term, but they all have to work together. At the end of the day, they're all citizens of one country, city, state, whatever we'd like to use. So there's always going to be a concept of how to deal with being on the losing side, and that's part of all life. Whether it's in elections, or whether your partner, your spouse, whether your business partner, whoever it may be, right? And that's why here at law school we teach you about mediation and how to try to make everyone feel that, whether they lost or whether they won or anything like that. So I want to talk a little bit about losing. So again, it really has to do with the elections, and coincidentally it had to do with the Torah portion that we recently read, and I think is instructive. But so I wanted to do first, whenever we learn Talmud, wherever we learn like Jewish sources, there's the legal parts of the Talmud, and then there's like the story parts, or the in the word we use is Agadah, which is like it's no real good translation, but like the esoteric or the non-legal, non-halakhic parts of the Talmud. So I want to do the legal parts first, and show you that the rabbis sort of never dealt with it, but even though they dealt with it but they didn't deal with it by dealing with it. And then we'll go into more of the stories and more biblical stories, more of the interesting, esoteric lessons. So if you look at page 1, in Deuteronomy, the Bible already was aware that this is going to be a problem. What do I mean? It says, the Bible talks about setting up a court system. So, and there are times that there are cases that are too baffling. That means you in your small little court, or wherever you are, wherever your jurisdiction is, you might not be able to figure out or come to a conclusion or understand really how to apply biblical law to your case. So, no problem. So then the Torah tells you, the Bible tells you what to do. And then you should go up to the higher person. You should go up to the head kohen, the head priest, whatever it may be, and he will tell you what to do. And he will teach you the laws. So if you look at verse 11, you shall act in accordance with the instruction given you and the ruling handed down to you. And then it says there's a high court. There's a high court, and it doesn't say it here, but the high court is based near the temple in Jerusalem, and you should not deviate from the verdict, either right or left. But the fact is that you needed to go to the high court. The fact that you needed to go and to the ultimate authority was because obviously there was this difference of opinions. There was one person who held X, one person who held Y, and they couldn't come to a conclusion, so they had no choice but to go to the highest authority. But by definition, there was someone who disagreed. So the Torah is aware of that. So it said, should either party, right, and act presumptuously. That's a nice, presumptuously is a nice word, but really means here, I would use the English translation, wantonly, and disregard the priest charged with serving there your God, that party shall die. So here it's a capital offense to disagree with the high court's decision. That's pretty intense. And with this, you will sweep away evil from Israel. That means we in the community cannot handle someone who dissents with the high court's opinion. And all the people will hear and be afraid and will never act that way again. Okay, so this is always why you don't just apply the Bible. If you apply the Bible directly, you could end up killing people a lot of times for capital crimes. So we have to, how did the Talmud understand this, these laws or this case? So in Sanhedrin, we call this a rebellious elder. In Hebrew, I just left it here for those of you who read Hebrew, it's called a zakein mamre. The term the Talmud uses is an elder who rebels. Okay, so it tells you the story. What's the case? There are 3 courts in Jerusalem. There were 3 levels of courts. Like in New York, right? You have the lower court, you have an appeals court, and you have the highest court. Or in every jurisdiction, there are 3 levels of court. So here also, there was one at the entrance to the Temple Mount, one at the entrance to the temple courtyard, and one in the ultimate I guess you would call the Supreme Court, in the chamber of the hewn stone. So that's in Jerusalem, there was a system, just like, in America, there's 3 levels of courts. You went to the first court, the second court, and to the third court. And it tells what would happen. And you'd go there to say, this is how I interpret it, this is my colleagues interpreted it, etc., etc. And then finally, the High Court, which actually comprised of was called the Sanhedrin, had 71 judges. They would render their verdict, and that would be the law. And now you have on page 2. So now, okay, they gave the law. If they ruled that there was an elder, that he didn't win, and he returned to his city. Okay, so let's just pick a case of ritual law just to make life a little easier. It's not. Let's not take civil, ritual Jewish law. And he said, I'm going to make something up. Just everyone has to walk around holding their ear like this. Okay. Well, let's not pick that. That's short. He said, what's a good case? I want to make. I don't know. What's a case of Jewish law that we can think of? Okay, we wear tefillin every day. He says tefillin from now on have to have 5 parshiot, have to have 5 scrolls instead of 4 scrolls. Okay, and he went to the High Court. He had proofs. Fine. So he comes home. He lost. What should he do? So if he comes back to his city and continues teaching and pushing for his opinion, he's exempt. He is not a rebellious elder. If he comes back and still says the words, my opinion is correct, he's not a rebellious elder. But if he instructed others to act, and he says you should disobey the High Court ruling and act contrary to what they said, that's a rebellious elder. So if he tells others to do, or he himself does, then he's a rebellious elder. But if he still claims his opinion is correct, but doesn't act on it, he's not a rebellious elder. So
that means, okay, my opinion, 5 parshiot. That's my opinion. I tell everybody that's my personal opinion. I like it the way I do it, but the court says that, then I'm not considered
a rebellious elder. Is okay, not correct. That means, so here you have something interesting. So it comes out, now if you would have just read the Bible, it sounds like if you're having a wrong opinion, we kill you. But so the Talmud sort of narrows it. It's you're allowed, and not only are you allowed to have your wrong opinion, you're allowed to still teach it, but you can't either act on it or tell others to act on it. And if you tell others to act on it, or you yourself act on it, then you become that rebellious elder with the the death penalty.
Rabbi, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
Is the Talmud now coming to define what the Torah meant, or is it coming to limit what the Torah meant?
Define.
Define.
Almost not change. This is how they're understanding what the Talmud means.
Okay.
This is the Talmud understanding how to apply the.
I know there's another concept that Torah is from Shemayim,
Right.
So at the same time, once it's here, they have the ability to change it.
Right. So
that's not what they're doing, though.
the assumption here, unless proven otherwise, is that this Talmud is explaining, yeah. And again, we're not going to spend that much time, but there are a lot of issues that are debatable. One of the topics that we're not going to talk about, because that's why I made up a weird case, right? There's a big debate. Do I have it here? I don't know if I put it here. So I didn't put it here, but there is actually a debate. Right over there. So right there, you pass it. So. We're on page 2. There is a big debate what laws are actually enter into the rebellious elder. So if you just pick, let's say let's say for example, I really believe, I'll give you a perfect example. Some of you are Sephardic and don't wear yarmulkes, and I'm Ashkenazi and I do wear a yarmulke. Okay? That's, if I get up and scream and yell and shout, we have a big debate, and let's say we go to the High Court and they say this is what you have to do. Even if you would disagree on that, since that is definitely a rabbinic law, so that you can't be a rebellious elder or rabbinic law. It has to be biblical law. And not only a biblical, it has to be a biblical law that is a serious biblical law. So there's a big debate actually which laws enter into rebellious elder, but that was a little too much for today, but since you asked it, so there's a lot of debate amongst the rabbis how to apply this. So that's why I know it's an application, not just changing. Okay, no problem. So again, here you have page 2 to page 3. This is Maimonides codifying all the laws of the rebellious elder. And what's interesting here, just for the top, you see it says it here. I guess I brought it at the. You're blocking straight on. You could. No problem. If you take a look here, his rebellion has to involve an instance where he has a difference of opinion in one of the Torah's laws, and it goes on to something further. Even if the court desires to forego their honor and allow them to live, they're not allowed to do so. So that difference of opinion will not arise within Israel. So Maimonides adds in, which is based on the Talmud, he adds in 2 points. One is that it's not just being a nice guy and honor, and one should treat give respect to the court. It's the court is not allowed to even say, listen, you're a good guy, we like you, just please don't do it in the future. No. If he does it, the court is not even foregoing their honor. And the reason being, as Maimonides points out, is that this is in a way to stamp out dissent. But we have a problem with that. Our problem with that is that we understand that people have difference of opinions, and we understand that societies are built on the fact that peoples and courts and elders have differences of opinions, and they can go further on. So if you just read this, you would say, okay, this doesn't apply today. Because this is talking about when you go, there's an ultimate authority, and the ultimate authority is always right, and in a way, you can't do anything about that. I'm going to skip ahead. If you take a look, so we're just a little background. That background comes from Leviticus. Leviticus talks about the offerings you bring. You guys have it back to back. Mine are it should be page 3. So in Leviticus chapter 4, it talks about God's name got printed. So just don't throw out the papers. It says here that there is a offering. So we know that if I sinned, I bring a guilt offering, a chatas, we would say in Hebrew, a guilt offering with the tithes of the temple. What if the high court made a mistake? What if the high court made a mistake? The high court got up and said, and they said, everyone should, I'll give an example. Okay, I'll give a simple example. The times when there was idolatry, so they came along and said, X, Y, and Z idol is not really an idol. Let's say the Jews for the first time in the temple heard of Buddha. And it's not an idol, or it is an idol, I don't want to say either way. And then later on they changed it, we made a mistake. And everyone in the meantime was worshiping Buddha. So, right, I'm just giving a random example, I'm not picking on, and so the rabbi, it says here, if the high court makes a mistake, and now you had millions or hundreds of thousands of people who did something wrong, because they admitted their mistake, then, and again, I'm not going to go into the parallels in American law, but you understand that if the Supreme Court, an obvious example, right, when separate but equal was considered okay, right? And all of a sudden they realized, hey, that's racist. So they made a mistake when they first said that separate but equal was a wonderful way of having a society. It was racist. So when they overturned separate but equal, they would have to go, okay, all those years that we were racist, had a racist society, what do you do about it? So, and all the people. So here the Torah says, if the high court realized they made a mistake, so instead of every individual bringing an offering, there's the whole community, and the high court brings their own offering. Okay. And that's called in Hebrew a parhel lamdavar, and the ox when something is hidden. But what's interesting is, what? So that means, so here there are 2 points here. One is the high court makes mistakes. It's possible. We're aware of that. So what if you're that guy? You're that elder, and you hear the high court saying X, Y, and Z is okay, and they're making a mistake. What do you do? Again, if you tell everyone they made a mistake, then we kill you. but you know they're making a mistake, and you know that one day they're going to figure it out, and then they're going to be sorry that they made a mistake. So look what it says here. This is in the Mishnah on Horios. If a court erroneously issued a ruling permitting the people to violate a mitzvah, whatever it is, and an individual proceeded and performed that transgression, right? He did it. That's the court's problem. But now on top of page 4, if the court issued a ruling and one of the judges knew that they erred, he knew they made a mistake, or if he was a student and he was qualified, meaning he wasn't a judge, but he was still a qualified student, and he knew they were making a mistake. In those cases, I'm skipping ahead, he is personally liable. He's not allowed to rely on the court's opinion. So here you have a very interesting sort of contradiction. On one hand, rebellious elders, you kill them. On the other hand, we are aware that sometimes they make a mistake, and sometimes those judges and students have to act in a way and say, I can't follow what they're doing, and when I do it, it's just not right. But what do you mean? If you tell everyone they're not right, you're a rebellious elder. So this is in a way the whole we call sugya, the whole issue at hand. On one hand, we don't want dissent. On the other hand, so one part of Torah, Deuteronomy says no dissent. And Leviticus says people make mistakes, and you have to be aware of that, and you have to take that account. And if you know they're making a mistake, don't follow what they're doing. But what is that? You can't have dissent. So there is seemingly a contradiction between Leviticus and Deuteronomy. And the answers, and again, I'm here just to propose a question. It seems, and this is, we have very little literature on this. And the answer is, the literature seems to be, how to deal with being wrong, or how to deal on the right and on the losing side of the matter. And the reason there's no literature, because it's something that really we have to figure out each society how to deal with those two contradictory things. We can't have dissent. We have to have unanimity, especially in ritual and godly law when you're trying to figure out what God wants in the world. And at the same time, we have to know that everyone, even the highest court ever, can be, even if they represent God, can make mistakes. And you have to be aware of that. And that is the topic at hand from the legal aspect. Now I want to point out that there are 3 main stories in the Talmud that deal with this dissenting issue. There's a famous story, and it's one of the most famous pieces of the Talmud, where the rabbis and an individual, whose name was Rabbi Eliezer, argued about the ritual impurity of a certain oven. And that's irrelevant, the type of oven. It's called the Tanur Avachnai. And the Talmud tells the stories of the rabbi performed miracles. And that's the famous story where you had the rabbis on one hand, Rabbi Eliezer on the other side, and Rabbi Eliezer did miracles. And even so, the Torah's, the rule of God is not in heaven. Lo b'shamayim, a famous Talmudic statement. And the point of that statement is that we follow the majority. That means God wanted, and we'll get to that in a second, that when He set up a court system, it says majority means that's what I want. And we'll get back to we'll try to get back to that. That's case number 1. Case number 2 is a very famous man. His name was Akavia ben Mahalalel, 3 L's. And he held 4 things different than the high court. And what did they do? They excommunicated him. So they didn't kill him, but they excommunicated him. But the instructive part is really the story at his death. So here at the bottom of page 4. At the time of his death, he told his son, okay, so Akavi said, I'm going to die. And you know that I was hated or excommunicated by the rabbis because of my opinion. But I want you to retract. I want you, my son, to retract and not follow my opinions. So the son said, whoa, something doesn't make sense here. If you really wanted to retract, why didn't you retract? He says, why did you not? He says, I followed the majority. When I was taught, that opinion that I follow was the majority opinion. And therefore, I have to stay to it because in my mind, it's the majority. But you only heard it from me, and I'm an individual. So what was the majority, and that's why I kept with it, became the minority, and you only know it as a minority opinion. You can't follow it. I can follow it. What's good for the goose is not good for the gander, right? And it's very interesting. So you would see, what do you mean? You got it from the majority, so then it should be always the majority opinion. No, times change. And he says, you have to change. And he says, so he says, okay. So he said, interesting. He said, it's a great story. He said, Dad or Father, could you tell your colleagues? Could you please tell your colleagues, to cut me some slack? Be nice to me. He says, I can't do that for you. So he says, why can't you do that for me? He says, maybe I did something wrong. He says, listen. And this is one of the great statements. Your own deeds will cause you to be near. Your own deeds will cause you to be far. In other words, you have to make your own legacy. You will be judged by your acts alone. Your dad can't help you. I'm not going to help you out, for good or for bad. And so that's case number 3. And the famous case number 4, that's case number 2. And case number 3 is in the famous case of Rabbi Yeshua. And Rabbi Gamliel argued when the new year would begin. The new year is based on lunar calculations, and they had a debate. And so according to one opinion, let's say Yom Kippur would be on Tuesday, and another opinion Yom Kippur would be on Wednesday. So the court found that Yom Kippur, let's say, would be on Wednesday. But one rabbi believed that Yom Kippur should be on Tuesday. So the head court, Rabbi Gamliel, demanded that Rabbi Yeshua walk on his, or do something, travel with his walking stick and his money on the day which he believed was Yom Kippur. Meaning he forced him to violate what in his mind was Yom Kippur. And that's another famous story of rabbinic authority. But there, in that case, as Rabbi Akiva explained, that could be, that's brilliant, because in that ritual law we have a special dispensation or special exception that whatever the court finds, God will go with. In other words, there is no inherent right or wrong. So, as opposed to ritual law, opposed to like the case of worshiping idols, where there is an inherent wrong or right, and the court, if they make a mistake, can make a mistake. Here, it's impossible to make a mistake because whatever they said is inherently right. Okay, so as you see, even the 3 famous cases in the Talmud that deal with dissenting opinions and tell us the stories, in each case we don't find how to deal and how to be like a good loser, or how to deal with the losing opinion and how to give it respect. It is getting a little late, but there is a famous comment of Nachmanides in Deuteronomy where he deals with this whole idea of why we trust the judges. And again, a lot of it is that we believe that what God said, follow the majority, when God said is no longer in his hands, he by definition seems to be saying that whatever the majority is, that's what I want. And that is God's speaking through the majority. Again, that the only problem with that is, as we said, is that how do you deal with when they make a mistake? So now I want to turn to, again, I don't know how well everyone knows their Bible, but there are 3 biblical stories in one week's portion that I believe is very instructive. We all hold Avraham in great esteem. I think if I would say that Avraham was a loser, you would all should throw stuff at me, right? I don't think I should say that out loud. But I think in 1 week's portion, Abraham, lost 3 times. He lost 3 times. So I'm going to go through this quick a little bit outside, but it's here on page 6 and 7, depending on, I'm not assuming any biblical knowledge, but I'll go a little quicker because people do know the stories. But the famous stories of Sodom and Gomorrah, those were the evil cities right near Abraham's hometown. And God, because he loves Abraham, says, listen, Abraham, I'm going to destroy those cities because they're evil and wicked cities. And Abraham starts praying and begging God to change his mind.
What if there were 10 people?
Right? Kept praying to God to change his mind. And finally God says, you know what? I heard your opinion. No. So he lost once. And it says, and if you take a look here, middle of page 6, chapter 18, verse 32, 33, and he says, God, I'm speaking, what if you found 10 people? And God said, if there were 10, I wouldn't destroy. Abraham finished speaking, God departed, and Abraham returned to his place. And that's to me, that's a very instructive statement of the Torah. We'll get back to it in a second. Case number 2. Case number 2 is, you all know that Abraham first had a son with Hagar, who was named Ishmael, and that was his oldest son. Then he had a child with his wife Sarah, and they named that Isaac or Yitzchak. And on the day of the party, not the day of the party, later on in life, Sarah saw her husband's son, not her son, doing something wrong, morally wrong, whatever that means. The rabbis have interpretation, and basically corrupting her son Isaac, Yitzchak. And she tells Avraham, you have to banish your son. Get rid of him. Now, Avram turned to her and said, first of all, he's my son, I can't do it. And second of all, I don't know if you remember, it was your advice that I should marry Hagar and have a son. So this is all your fault. I wouldn't say that, but really, you can't say that. This was your idea. And she says, no, adamant. And Avram does not want to listen to her until God intervenes and says, you have to listen to her. So if you look at the top of page 7, God said to Abraham, do not be distressed over the boy. Whatever Sarah tells you, do what she says. So without God, Avram was adamant that he was right. Again, husband and wife are fighting. He thought he was right. And, okay, maybe, God said, you're wrong. You're wrong. What does he do in this case? So the Torah doesn't say, return to his place. That's interesting. The next morning, he gave him gave him a sandwich and a bottle of water. Hey, have a nice life. Go to the desert, here's a sandwich and a bottle of water. I mean, if Avram he really loved his son Yishmael, didn't want to send him away. God told him he had no choice to listen to Sarah. What would have I done if I was Avraham? I would have given him a credit card, I would have got him an Uber, I would have given him camels. Again, he was a rich man, Avram. He sent him with a sandwich and a bottle of water. So not only did he follow and act on the what he was told by God and his wife, he totally switched his mindset. Okay, that's what I got to do. He absorbed the other opinion. Number 3, God turns him famous. The final test of Abraham's life was the binding of Isaac, the binding Akedat Yitzchak. And God says, sacrifice your son. Okay, he does it. One of the final tests of Avram. And then finally, as he's about to do it, an angel reaches down, calls down, and says, Abraham, stop it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Do not raise, verse 12, do not raise your hand against the boy. Don't do anything to him. You've proven you follow God. You've proven that you fear God. Don't do anything. Okay. And then it tells a funny story. So he took a ram, and he brought the ram, and he offered up the ram in place of his son. So the rabbis, if you take a look at the top of page 8, the rabbis pointed out, first of all, why does it keep telling you don't do anything and don't even put your hand on him? Because Abraham argued with God. Top of page 8, he says, listen, I've come so far. I want to prove my loyalty to you. I want to show you that I'm willing to sacrifice my son. Let me at least draw some blood. Let me at least give him something. Make it look like we did something here. I want to do it. And God said no. No blemish, no nothing. But Avram wasn't even satisfied with that. If you look at the next Rashi, it says, it took the ram, every time, whatever action he did in offering the ram, he said, this should be like doing it to my son. This should be like doing it to my son. This should be like doing it to my son. What do you mean? God said no. So here you have you have 3 times that God and Avraham had a discussion, and Avraham lost. And each time he had a different response. Once, he went back to his place, quiet. Second time, he absorbed the other opinion and totally made it his own, and went fully with that opinion. And here, he took it, but he still acted with his own opinion in a way that was acceptable. I can't sacrifice my son, but it's like I sacrificed my son. I can't sacrifice my son, but I'm going to do actions that is like it. So you see 3 different. Now, there was a winner in the same portion last week. Who was the winner? And a real argument was Lot, Abraham's nephew. He was in Sodom, and he got saved by the angels. And the angels told him specifically, run away from here, go to the mountains, go back to your uncle, leave these wicked people, go. He's on the way, he says, excuse me, Mr. Angels, or Mrs. Angels, I don't know, right? I don't want to go to my uncle. It's too much for me. I don't want to go. I'd like to go to that small city. So no, we want to destroy that city. He goes, no, but that city's a little bit newer than other cities. Let me just go to that city. He said, you know what? Okay, you win. He won. Again, they told him go to the mountains. He argued and he won. And what happened when he won? You all know your Bible story. He ended up doing stories with incest with his daughters. For whatever reason. So he won, and then he sort of lost. So in that same portion, you have four arguments. 3 by Avram, he lost and he won. The fourth one, Lot, where he won and then he lost. And I think to me that the story of Avram, that they put all those stories in one portion, and each time he had a different response, shows you that it's not always simple. And I think it's the hardest thing we have, how to deal with when other people, when losing to other people's arguments. And what's I think the most instructive is that what's sort of wanted from us is there are 3 possible ways of doing it. Either totally absorbing the other opinion, going back and doing nothing, or following in your opinion with the other opinion. Try to do both. And I think, in a way, that's part of why we don't have real good instruction of the Talmud on a legal basis how to do it. Now, I was always taught I couldn't find the English translation, like at 2 in the morning, and I don't have the book, so I wasn't able to, so it's all in Hebrew. There was a movement, there was a great rabbi in the late 1800s, his name was Rabbi mid-1800s, Rabbi Israel Salanter. He founded the ethical movement known as the Musar movement, in Lithuania, or that part of Eastern Europe, the non-Hasidic part of Europe, of European Jewry, it was called the Musar movement. There are great books on it. Rabbi Israel Salanter, if anyone's interested, and he wrote a bunch of letters. And his first letter, which I have here, he's talking about dealing with a committee. Now we all know committees are always opportunities for disagreement, and he's saying, I want you to start. He wanted to start a movement, and he said, I want you to start a movement, and I want you to make a committee, and I know you're all going to argue and fight. And he basically says here, each person has to help the other, and the foolishness of your friend you have to help out with. And you have to go, and sometimes you have to go and act like your friend's foolishness. Now that sounds like a very weird advice. Okay, I'm starting a movement, and I know we have a committee, and I know someone's going to say something that I disagree with and is foolish. And I have to follow and work on that foolish person's opinion, or the foolish opinion of my friend. And what he seems to be saying here is very interesting. And I think that's sort of relevant, tying it back to when you deal with a democracy. When you're dealing with, my life, okay, I'm always right, obviously, right? And me and my wife argue about how to educate our daughters, so okay, we have different opinions, we can accept that. But when you're dealing with communities, and when you're dealing with societies, and when you're dealing with whether on a ritual level or at any legal level, the first most instructive thing is no one really knows how to predict the future, and no one really knows what the best way to go future. So I'm able to say your opinion is something that I can adopt, because same way you can adopt my opinion, I can adopt your opinion. It has to be that in a society that when it comes that we can't all control all the future people. We can't tell all people how to act. Myself, I know what's right. When it comes to maybe even my children, maybe. But that's what we see here from the rebellious elder, that when it comes to ritual law, when it comes to running the law for society, there has to be that humility built in, that at the end of the day, we're all trying to figure out the best way of society, and I'm able to work with your opinion of society. And I think that we'd all somehow incorporate that a little bit more into our thought process. I think we'd be doing a great job. I think that's what we want of the Zaken Mamre. I think that answers the question we started with, that you can never, ever go against the High Court, but you're always allowed to explain your opinion, because opinions are always acceptable. But we have to have one way of doing things. And the rebellious elder, he's only a rebellious elder when he says to do something differently. But when he says, this is my opinion, he said, okay, that's a very valid opinion. You're allowed to have an opinion. You can't do anything about it. We have to have one way of acting, which the rebellious elder has to say that this is my opinion, but I'm willing and understanding that this is how things have to go. And I think that's sort of the lesson that we all could always use, always, whenever we deal with losing an argument. Thank you for joining me.